This is an entry-level explanation of the British Empire. In the 16th century, Britain began to build its empire. Imperialism was the name of the game, as the country's rule was spread beyond its borders, bringing changes to cultures, societies, industries, and lives all around the world. Its impacts are still seen today. First, let's start with what an empire really is. Think of it as a group of states or territories that has one single ruler. The reason for an empire is to control lands outside of a country's own borders. We've seen examples throughout history of empire builders doing so to acquire resources while introducing new laws and practices to indigenous peoples who have inhabited the land that they're taking over. This process is referred to as colonization. So let's talk about the British Empire. This would be all of the places around the world that were once ruled by Britain. This empire was built over many years and grew to include modern-day countries in Africa, Asia, New Zealand, Australia, North, South, and Central America too. Between the years of 1919 and 1922, the British Empire was at its height. They were the largest empire the world had seen and covered over an astounding roughly 25% of the Earth's land surface and ruled over around 458 million people. During the 16th century's Age of Discovery, the advancement of technology, namely ships, led to more exploration, which in turn led to the discovery of new lands. What then was referred to as England, in what now we call Britain, wanted more land overseas where it could build colonies. These colonies are where England drew much needed commodities, such as metals, sugar, tobacco, and other valuable materials that they could sell to other countries. So these countries were essentially money-making opportunities for wealthy Englishmen, and brought new jobs and places to live for England's unemployed and poor. But make no mistake, the English, now British, it wasn't until 1707 that Scotland joined England and Wales to become the Kingdom of Great Britain, were not the only ones trying to conquer other lands. They were simply the most successful. Other European countries were also exploring the world and, quote, discovering new lands, often inhabited by indigenous populations and building empires. The first English colonies were in North America in what is now referred to as the New World. Not all attempts to create colonies were successes, however. Just look into the story of the Roanoke in Virginia back in 1585. It wasn't until 1607 that Captain John Smith founded the first permanent English colony at Jamestown in Virginia. And this sometimes led to fights with other European nations for control over their colonies. It was during the 17th and 18th centuries where England gained colonies in North America, the West Indies, and modern-day Caribbean islands. There is where you can find the perfect climate for certain crops, such as sugar and tobacco, which is where they set up plantations. This is around the time the trading settlements were created by the East India Company. As most of you already know, the founding of the country that we know as current-day United States of America was a turning point in British history. Around the years 1775 to 1783, the British nation lost a significant part of its empire in the American War of Independence. This is where the 13 colonies in North America united and fought to be free from British rule. With the help of allies such as Spain, France, and the Netherlands, the colonies won the war, gained independence, and became the United States. This time in history marked the end of what we now refer to as the First British Empire. Although Britain lost a large part of its North American territories, new lands were claimed in the late 18th century and early 19th century, which formed the Second British Empire. This is where colonies were founded in parts of Australia and later Trinidad and Ceylon, which is now current-day Sri Lanka, Singapore, and Hong Kong, China, as well as other areas in the Asian continent. During what is known in history as the scramble for Africa between 1881 and 1902, Britain competed with other European empire builders. By the early 1900s, huge parts of Africa, including Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, and a large area of southern Africa, all became under British rule. Now, the British Empire was back, stronger and more powerful than ever. Throughout the rise and course of the British Empire, tribes and communities paid the price for the new land, some of which were robbed of their land, taken advantage of by traders, and even faced violence and death at the hands of some British settlers. During World War II, India suffered a famine, in part caused by the British government taking vital supplies away from the Indian people to support the war effort elsewhere, which caused death to millions. The indigenous in Africa were also affected. The British took valuable materials such as gold, salt, and ivory out of Africa to send back to their country and abroad. The British were also heavily involved in the transatlantic slave trade in West Africa. Beliefs, language, and traditions were forcibly replaced and swapped for their British equivalents, also removing their cultural identities. Settlers and governments drew up new borders and land boundaries that split the local people into new countries and categories that didn't always represent them or reflect their heritage, history, and customs. For some countries, these changes still create conflict. The slave trade was also a factor in this time. Over the next 400 years, traders bought and sold an estimated 12 million African people, many of which were forcibly taken from their homes and shipped across the ocean to Europe and the Americas, where they were forced to work. An estimated 3 million people were thought to have been sold to British slave traders. This unpaid labor allowed slave owners to farm items such as sugar, tobacco, and cotton, which they could later sell for profit, and this largely funded Britain's Industrial Revolution, which contributed to Britain's wealth. Britain later banned the trading of enslaved people in 1807 in what is known as abolition, and 26 years later, slavery was outlawed altogether, emancipation. When slavery was abolished, the British government compensated slave owners for the loss of their human property. The compensation sum was vast, and in fact, the loan taken out to pay for it was still being paid off by the British taxpayers as recently as 2015. Many former slave owners went on to invest the compensations they were given into new businesses, some of which continue to exist today. Over the course of the 20th century, Britain's empire broke down in stages. 1926 was an important year for the dismantling of the empire, as Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and South Africa became independent from British control. These countries had large populations of European descendants living under the rule of formal governments, and were considered to be capable of running their own countries. Some British colonies weren't allowed independence at first, yet over the next decades, many of them continued to push for independence. The Second World War brought its struggles, after which Britain lost a great deal of wealth and strength required to manage so many overseas empires. Many of the colonies had fought for the British during the war and were making their plans for independence. India gained its independence from Britain in 1947, and then over a roughly 30-year span from the 1950s to 1980s, many African colonies also gained their independence. Hong Kong, the last significant British colony, was returned to China in 1997. Today, there are still fragments of the British Empire in the form of British overseas territories. These overseas territories are mostly self-governing territories separate from the United Kingdom, but still share the bond. This includes Anguilla, Bermuda, British Antarctic Territory, British Indian Ocean Territory, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, Montserrat, St. Helena, Turks and Caicos, and more. This brings us to the Commonwealth of Nations, or simply known as the Commonwealth, which is an organization that began in 1931. This was when Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the United Kingdom formed the British Commonwealth of Nations. It is made up of 50 countries that engage in work and trade with one another. Today, the United Kingdom is made up of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. This video was just scratching the surface of the complexities that is the British Empire, remnants of which can still be seen today. If you've learned something new from this video, like and subscribe for more content just like this. Goodbye for now.